It was Christmas morning in the heart of Europe, in a grand estate where wealth and power defined every corner of life. Snow blanketed the sprawling gardens, and the Baron, a man of immense influence, prepared to greet the day with all the pomp and tradition that his title demanded. But this Christmas would be unlike any other. For on this day, a gift arrived that would unravel decades of carefully hidden secrets, shake the very foundations of a noble family, and leave a legacy of shock that no one could have predicted. Imagine receiving a gift that seems extraordinary, almost too strange to be real, only to discover that it carries a truth so horrifying it defies comprehension. This was the Christmas that would haunt the Baron for the rest of his life. The Baron was a man who had inherited wealth, land, and influence from a long line of ancestors who prided themselves on discipline, tradition, and social hierarchy. His estate was a fortress of refinement, with polished floors that reflected the flickering candlelight, walls adorned with centuries-old paintings, and corridors filled with the echoes of footsteps long past. Every element of his world was carefully orchestrated, every action deliberate, and yet, despite his power, the Baron's life would soon collide with secret that had been buried beneath layers of history, hidden behind the veneer of aristocratic order. It began with the arrival of a shipment, a delivery that on the surface seemed routine. In those times, noble families often exchanged rare gifts during the holidays, exotic goods, luxurious textiles, and tragically, even human beings. Slavery, though fading in some regions, still existed in hidden forms, and powerful families sometimes considered human lives as possessions, objects to be gifted for prestige or influence. On this particular morning, the Baron received an enslaved woman as a gift from a distant relative, a gesture intended to demonstrate loyalty, wealth, and the continued reach of the family's influence. No one could have anticipated that this simple act of social custom would ignite a revelation more shocking than any scandal in the family's history. The young woman who arrived at the estate was described by the delivery servants as remarkable in appearance. Her eyes held a quiet intelligence, a calm awareness that seemed to observe everything around her with subtle understanding. Her presence was immediately felt, not just because of her striking features, but because of the odd sense of familiarity that clung to her movements. It was a kind of familiarity that unsettles the mind, a whisper of recognition that doesn't yet have a name. The Baron, accustomed to being in control of every situation, felt a flicker of unease the moment he laid eyes on her. Something about her was profoundly familiar, yet he could not place it. As the days passed, the young woman's presence in the estate became more noticeable. She was assigned menial tasks at first, as was customary, but her demeanor, grace, and intelligence soon made her stand apart from the ordinary expectations of servitude. Those who interacted with her remarked on a subtle dignity that was impossible to ignore, and yet the Baron could not shake the strange, nagging thought that there was something inexplicably connected between them, something hidden in the recesses of memory and blood. In those quiet moments, when the estate lay silent and only the wind whispered to the hallways, he found himself staring at her, a storm of confusion brewing beneath the surface of his composed exterior. No one in the household suspected the truth, though the Baron himself would soon confront it in a way that no one could anticipate. The discovery was not sudden. It came in fragments, a glance here, a gesture there, pieces of a puzzle that had been lost over generations. The realization hit him not as an abstract thought, but as a visceral truth that shook his understanding of identity, family, and morality. The enslaved woman who had arrived as a Christmas gift was not merely a stranger. She was the Baron's own sister, hidden away by the tangled web of family secrets, deception, and societal expectation. The revelation was unbearable, the kind of truth that twists the world upside down and challenges every assumption about justice, loyalty, and the nature of kinship. The story of this Christmas gift is not just a tale of shock and scandal. It is a reflection of society built on hierarchy, secrecy, and the objectification of human life. It is a glimpse into the world where noble titles and wealth could overshadow morality, where human beings were treated as commodities, and where the bonds of family could be severed and hidden in plain sight. In exploring this story, we will journey to the corridors of power, the shadowed rooms where secrets festered, and the human lives caught in the crossfire of tradition, greed, and a shocking twist of fate. By the end, you will understand not only the horror of that fateful Christmas morning, but also the resilience, courage, and consequences that followed in the lives of those entwined in this dark chapter of history. To understand the shocking revelation that would shake the Baron to his core, we must first step back in time and explore the tangled history of his family. The Baron's lineage was long and distinguished, stretching back several centuries, filled with figures whose influence shaped the political and economic landscape of their region. Estates were inherited, marriages were arranged for strategic alliances, and wealth was meticulously preserved to ensure that each generation maintained or expanded the family's power. But behind the gilded facade of prestige lay secrets darker than any scandal recorded in the public annals of the nobility. The Baron's father was a man of commanding presence, a patriarch who ruled over his household with strict authority. He valued control above all else and was determined to preserve the family name, sometimes at unimaginable costs. In the shadows of this rigid household, whispers of illegitimate children, secret liaisons, and hidden alliances swirled, though they were rarely acknowledged outside the family walls. One of these secrets would eventually reach forward in time, culminating in the arrival of the young woman who had been sent as a Christmas gift. She was not merely an unfortunate soul thrust into slavery. She was a product of the very family that now regarded her as property. The young woman's early life was veiled in mystery, her origins deliberately obscured to protect reputations and maintain appearances. She had been taken from her mother at a very young age and placed under the supervision of distant relatives, who were instructed to conceal her identity and upbringing. She grew up unaware of the full extent of her heritage, believing herself to be someone entirely separate from the Baron and the grand estate she would later enter. Her formative years were marked by hardship, confusion, and isolation, yet she exhibited resilience and intelligence beyond her circumstances. Every lesson she learned, every skill she acquired, prepared her in ways no one could have imagined for the fateful moment when her path would cross with her own family. Meanwhile, life on the Baron's estate proceeded according to long-established routines. The family maintained a strict hierarchy among its staff and inhabitants, and outsiders were treated with suspicion or outright disdain. The Baron himself had been trained from an early age to exercise dominance and control, qualities expected of a nobleman. Yet, despite his authoritative upbringing, he was unaware that fate had placed someone intimately connected to him in the shadows of his estate. The young woman, sent as a Christmas gift by a distant relative unaware, or perhaps unwilling, to reveal the truth, became the catalyst for a confrontation with family history that had been carefully buried for generations. As she arrived at the estate, she quickly observed the strict codes of behavior, the unspoken rules that dictated how each member of the household conducted themselves. She learned to navigate these rules with subtlety, never revealing more than was necessary, but quietly assessing the environment around her. Every glance, every interaction became a piece of the puzzle, and slowly she began to sense the unspoken tensions within the household. Yet, she could never have anticipated the profound recognition that would eventually pass between her and the Baron, a connection born of shared blood and a history hidden in plain sight. The Baron, for his part, initially saw her only as a gift, a possession meant to symbolize wealth, status, and influence. The very idea that the woman standing before him could be related by blood was unthinkable. His mind could not reconcile the rigid rules of inheritance and nobility with the possibility that his family had hidden a sibling in plain sight. And yet, subtle clues began to emerge, mannerisms, expressions, even the tilt of her head, that triggered a deep, instinctive sense of recognition. Memories he had long suppressed, images from childhood, and half-forgotten stories whispered by servants all began to surface, forming a puzzle he could no longer ignore. The tension between them grew with every passing day. The young woman, aware of nothing except her own survival and cautious observation, remained composed and dignified, even under scrutiny. The Baron, increasingly disturbed by the uncanny resemblance and shared traits, struggled with disbelief. How could a stranger exhibit such familiar traits, qualities that mirrored his own family so closely? His mind raced through every explanation, mistaken identity, coincidence, trickery, but none seemed to fit. The pieces of the puzzle were too precise, too deliberate to dismiss. The realization began to crystallize, though he could not yet fully articulate it. The enslaved woman before him was connected to him in a way that defied the very social order he had been raised to uphold. Meanwhile, Whispers began to circulate among the servants and minor household members. Some sensed that something extraordinary had occurred, though they could not place it. Others noticed the Baron's growing agitation, his restless pacing, the intensity with which he studied the woman's every action. Curiosity, fear, and suspicion began to ripple through the household. Yet the full truth remained hidden from everyone except the Baron. He was trapped between the rigid expectations of his social class, the responsibility to maintain family honor, and the undeniable truth that loomed closer with every passing day. What began as a seemingly ordinary Christmas gift had become a living, breathing embodiment of a family secret that refused to remain buried. Days turned into weeks as a young woman settled into the Baron's estate, performing her duties under the watchful eyes of the household staff. At first, she was treated like any other arrival, an exotic gift of family, a symbol of status meant to impress visiting nobility. But beneath the surface of this ordinary veneer, an extraordinary tension was building. The Baron could no longer ignore the flicker of familiarity that haunted him every time he caught her gaze, every time he observed the subtle grace in her movements. It was as if she carried the echo of someone he had known long ago, someone who belonged to his own bloodline. He began to notice details that could not be coincidences. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her hands, the precise way she carried herself. Each gesture mirrored a memory buried deep in his subconscious. It was disconcerting, almost unbearable, to recognize these traits in someone he'd been taught to regard as property. A storm of emotions raged within him. Disbelief, guilt, fear, and a strange fascination that he could not quell. The very idea that a family secret could manifest so clearly in front of him filled the Baron with both dread and an insatiable curiosity. The gift he had received for Christmas was no longer merely an object of status. It had become a mirror reflecting a truth he was unprepared to confront. The household staff, oblivious to the deeper currents, continued their routines, unaware of the silent battle waging between the Baron and the young woman. Some servants noticed his frequent, lingering stares, the way he seemed to scrutinize her more closely than anyone else. Whispers began to circulate in the background, questions left unspoken, glances exchanged over sweeping hallways and candlelit rooms. Yet no one dared speak directly, for the Baron's presence was commanding, and his authority left no room for speculation that might seem impertinent. In this charged atmosphere, the young woman remained composed, her calm demeanor masking an awareness that was sharper than most realized. She sensed the tension, though the full truth remained hidden from her as well. The Baron tried to rationalize his unease. He told himself that it was coincidence, a trick of the mind playing over time and stress. Nobility often prized resemblance as a mark of lineage, and he had seen countless portraits of distant relatives who bore uncanny similarities. Yet the resemblance he now observed was different. It was not just facial features or gestures. It was something deeper, an innate rhythm, a shared essence that seemed impossible to ignore. The young woman's very presence challenged the Baron's understanding of his own life and family, and with each passing day, the weight of unspoken knowledge grew heavier. Sleep became restless. Meals went unnoticed, and the carefully constructed routines of his world began to unravel. At the same time, subtle clues began to emerge from the young woman herself. She exhibited knowledge of customs, phrases, and mannerisms that were rare outside the family's inner circle. Small, seemingly trivial behaviors, the way she responded to a certain family greeting, the way she recognized patterns in household routines, hinted at an origin far closer than anyone had anticipated. These observations, while minor to an outsider, struck the Baron with growing intensity. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory, old letters, and stories whispered in hushed tones over the years. Each fragment formed a mosaic pointing to a reality he had long refused to consider. The young woman before him was intimately connected to him by blood. The tension reached a critical point during a quiet evening in the estate library. The Baron, alone with his thoughts, reflected on childhood memories, moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now took on new meaning. Faces, voices, and fleeting impressions resurfaced, converging into a pattern too precise to ignore. He realized with a jolt that the young woman's presence was not a random gift, but a living reminder of a family secret deliberately hidden from him. The initial shock was overwhelming, a mixture of disbelief and horror at the implications. To accept the truth was to confront a lifetime of deception, manipulation, and moral compromise. Conflict consumed him. On one hand, he was a nobleman bound by societal rules, taught to prioritize lineage, honor, and reputation above all else. On the other, he faced a personal, emotional reckoning that demanded recognition of a truth that society and tradition had long sought to suppress. The Baron struggled to reconcile these conflicting forces. The knowledge that the young woman was his sister, enslaved, hidden, and delivered to him as a gift, challenged everything he had been taught about power, family, and morality. It was a revelation so profound that it threatened to shatter the carefully constructed identity he had built for himself. As days passed, he could no longer act as if nothing were amiss. He began to observe her more closely, noting her reactions, her expressions, and even the rare moments when she allowed herself to relax. Each observation fueled his growing certainty and fear. The young woman, though unaware of the full truth, sensed a shift in the Baron's behavior, a tension that hung like a shadow over her every move. It was a delicate, unspoken dance of awareness and denial, where the slightest gesture could ignite recognition or suspicion. The stakes were high, and every interaction became a test of intuition, memory, and courage. By the time the first snow of the season melted, the Baron could no longer ignore the truth. The realization had taken root in his mind, unstoppable and undeniable. He faced a choice that would define his legacy: conceal the secret and maintain appearances, or confront the past and acknowledge the horrifying reality. The implications were enormous. To act recklessly could ruin the family's reputation, yet to remain silent was to participate in the cruel deception that had allowed his sister to endure slavery while he lived in ignorance. This inner conflict became the central struggle of his life, a battle between social expectation and moral imperative, between fear and responsibility, between ignorance and the unavoidable truth. The tension that had quietly simmered in the Baron's estate for weeks finally reached a breaking point. One evening, after the household had settled into its usual rhythm, he called the young woman to the study, a room lined with towering shelves of leather-bound books, ornate chandeliers, and a heavy scent of polished wood. The flickering firelight cast long shadows across the walls, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation and unease. It was a private moment, but one that would change the course of both their lives forever. As she entered the room, the Baron could not hide the storm raging behind his composed exterior. Her eyes met his, calm yet alert, as if she sensed that something significant was about to unfold. The silence stretched between them, charged with unspoken questions, memories, and the weight of truth. The Baron struggled to find words, each attempt seeming inadequate to the gravity of the revelation he could no longer deny. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling despite his effort to remain steady. He asked her name, her origins, and her story, not merely out of curiosity, but because he desperately needed confirmation of the suspicions that had plagued him for weeks. The young woman answered with careful precision, providing details of her past without revealing what she did not yet know: that the Baron was her brother. She spoke of her early life, the distant relatives who had cared for her, and confusion that had accompanied her journey through the shadows of nobility and servitude. Each word, though seemingly innocuous, struck the Baron like a revelation. He noticed patterns in her speech, memories she recounted, and the very way she carried herself, details that mirrored his own upbringing in uncanny ways. The realization crystallized before him. This was no ordinary gift, no random arrival. She was a sister, the child of a secret kept hidden for decades, now standing in the very room he called home. Shock rendered the Baron momentarily silent. The firelight danced across the room, reflecting the turmoil in his eyes. How could a family have allowed such a secret to fester for so long? How could they have hidden her away, treated her as property, while the Baron remained ignorant of her existence? A sense of guilt and responsibility washed over him, intertwining with disbelief and a dawning horror. The very fabric of his family's legacy, carefully preserved over generations, had been built upon lies, concealment, and cruelty. And now, the consequences of those choices had arrived at his doorstep, embodied in the quiet dignity of a sister he had never known. The young woman, unaware of her true relation to the Baron, sensed a shift in his demeanor. She noticed the intensity of his gaze, the hesitation in his voice, and the subtle tremor in his hands. For the first time, she glimpsed the vulnerability in the man who had seemed so authoritative, so untouchable. This moment of shared tension marked the beginning of an unspoken connection, an invisible thread linking them across the chasm of years and secrecy. She did not yet understand the full truth, but instinctively, she recognized that something profound had changed between them. The room, filled with the scent of burning wood and old books, became a silent witness to a revelation that words alone could not contain. The Baron, struggling to contain his emotions, began piecing together the fragments of memory and observation he had accumulated over weeks. Childhood images resurfaced, faces glimpsed in fleeting moments, conversations overheard but forgotten, gestures repeated by relatives long gone. Each fragment confirmed what he already suspected, and yet the reality of it was almost unbearable. The young woman was his blood, a part of him, yet treated as a possession in a system that valued status over humanity. The weight of this knowledge pressed upon him, demanding acknowledgement and action, yet the path forward remained uncertain. Every option seemed fraught with risk, every choice a potential disaster for fragile equilibrium of family, society, and morality. As the Baron grappled with this revelation, the emotional intensity of the moment reached its peak. He confronted the young woman directly, asking questions he had avoided for weeks. He inquired about her parents, her upbringing, and the circumstances that led to her being sent to his estate. Her answers, honest and measured, confirmed the hidden connections he had feared. Each revelation was a blow, each confirmation a hammer striking the foundation of everything he had believed about his family and himself. The sense of betrayal, both personal and familial, was overwhelming. The Baron realized that the very institution of nobility, the legacy of wealth and power he had inherited, had been complicit in hiding a human being, his own sister, in plain sight. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread throughout the household. Servants noticed the unusual tension in the study, the Baron's agitation, and prolonged private conversation. Some speculated, others feared, but none dared intervene. The young woman returned from the study later that evening, her demeanor composed, yet she carried with her an invisible weight she did not fully understand. The Baron, consumed by the revelation, remained isolated in thought, pacing the study late into the night, wrestling with the enormity of the secret he had uncovered. The Christmas gift that had seemed so ordinary, so symbolic of status and tradition, had transformed into a catalyst for moral reckoning, emotional confrontation, and the unearthing of a family legacy built on deception. The consequences of that first confrontation would ripple through the estate in the weeks that followed. The Baron's inner conflict intensified, his decisions becoming more cautious yet deliberate. He began to plan how to navigate the delicate balance between exposing the truth and protecting the fragile structure of his household. Every interaction with his sister became charged with meaning, every glance a reminder of the forbidden knowledge they now shared. The young woman, unaware of the full truth but acutely aware of a shift in their relationship, began to respond with subtle caution, adapting to the undercurrent of tension that permeated the estate. In this delicate dance of revelation and concealment, the stage was set for events that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The days following the first confrontation were filled with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over every corridor, staircase, and hall of the Baron's sprawling estate. Though the household carried on with its usual routines, servant preparing meals, guards patrolling the grounds, and minor staff tending to their duties, an invisible weight pressed down on everyone. The Baron's demeanor had shifted noticeably. His measured authority now carried undercurrents of unease and preoccupation. Even the young woman, though outwardly composed, sensed the changes around her. The subtle glances, hushed tones, and the occasional pause in conversation were enough to hint at the growing awareness that something extraordinary, something forbidden, had begun to unfold within these walls. Rumors, as they inevitably do in estates where secrecy and hierarchy intermingle, began to ripple quietly among the servants. Some spoken whispers of the Baron's late-night pacing and the unusual private discussions he had with the young woman. Others noticed the fleeting looks exchanged between the two, moment of recognition, subtle gestures, or lingering eye contact that suggested an unspoken connection. Yet no one dared speak openly. The household was bound by the rigid codes of respect and fear, and the Baron's authority was absolute. Still, the air grew thick with suspicion, a collective sense of anticipation that something monumental had occurred behind the closed doors of the study. Meanwhile, the extended family, distant cousins, uncles, and old friends, began to arrive at the estate, as was customary during the holiday season. They carried with them gifts, compliments, and inquiries, unaware of the secret that now overshadowed every interaction. The Baron, acutely conscious of appearances, struggled to maintain a facade of normalcy. Polite greetings, well-timed smiles, and careful conversation masked the turbulence raging beneath the surface. He was caught in a delicate balancing act. He needed to preserve the family's reputation, while coming to terms with the moral and emotional implications of the revelation he had uncovered. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, was measured against the possibility of inadvertently exposing the truth. The young woman, too, felt the weight of observation more acutely than ever. She noticed how family members regarded her, how subtle cues, slight hesitation, sideways glances, or the briefest flicker of recognition, hinted at secrets she could not yet understand. Her presence in the household became a catalyst, prompting questions about lineage and inheritance, and the hidden histories that underpinned the Baron's family. Though she remained unaware of the full truth, her intuition and careful observation allowed her to navigate the complex web of relationships, avoiding missteps while absorbing the unspoken tensions that surrounded her. Within this charged atmosphere, the Baron found himself grappling with the moral dilemma of how to act. Should he confront the family openly and reveal the truth, risking scandal and social ostracism? Or should he continue to conceal the secret, silently acknowledging the injustice that had been done, while preserving the outward appearance of order and propriety? Each option carried immense risk. Public exposure could devastate the family's reputation, destroy alliances, and invite scrutiny from both peers and authorities. Silence, on the other hand, meant complicity in the continued concealment of profound injustice, a human life hidden, enslaved, and denied recognition for the sake of appearances. As the Baron struggled with this dilemma, subtle fractures began to emerge within the household. Servants who had long been loyal now displayed nervous behaviors, minor mistakes, or subtle acts of defiance. The young woman herself, though careful, began to assert small measures of agency, exercising judgment in her duties in ways that did not go unnoticed. These shifts, though seemingly minor, contributed to an undercurrent of tension, a sense that the carefully orchestrated order of the state was beginning to unravel. The Baron, ever vigilant, found himself increasingly consumed by the responsibility of maintaining control while wrestling with the emotional weight of discovering his sister in such circumstances. The arrival of letters and communications from distant relatives and business associates further complicated matters. Some correspondence alluded to family secrets, hinted at past transgressions, or carried veiled warnings about inheritance and legitimacy. The Baron interpreted these messages with heightened sensitivity, aware that even the slightest misstep could expose the household's vulnerabilities. Each day became a careful negotiation of observation, restraint, and strategic action. Every conversation, every interaction, was laden with meaning, whether overt or implied, as the delicate balance between concealment and disclosure became increasingly difficult to maintain. Through it all, the young woman remained a figure of quiet strength and resilience. Her ability to observe, adapt, and navigate the household's complex dynamics earned her a measure of respect and attention, even from those who saw her primarily as property. Yet beneath her composure, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty, a growing sense that her own history and identity were entwined with the household in ways she could not yet fully grasp. The tension between knowledge and ignorance, between authority and morality, set the stage for inevitable confrontation, a confrontation that would test the limits of loyalty, courage, and familial bonds. By the end of the season, the Baron had come to a painful clarity. The presence of his sister in the household, hidden in plain sight, was a living testament to the failures, compromises, and moral blind spots of generations before him. He recognized that the choices he made in the coming days would define not only his own legacy, but also the future of the family he had inherited. The Christmas gift that had arrived innocuously weeks earlier had become a catalyst for change, a mirror reflecting both the cruelty and the resilience embedded in his family's history. Every member of the household, from the highest-ranking servants to the Baron himself, would soon be forced to confront the repercussions of secrets that could no longer remain buried. After weeks of inner turmoil and sleepless nights, the Baron realized that he could no longer remain passive. The truth of his sister's identity weighed heavily on him, demanding action. He was caught between two worlds, the rigid expectations of nobility and the moral imperative to acknowledge a human being who had been hidden and enslaved by his own family. The stakes were immense. One wrong move could destroy the family's reputation, alienate loyal relatives, and spark scandal throughout the region. Yet to do nothing would be to perpetuate an injustice of unspeakable cruelty. With a heavy heart, he began to formulate a plan, a course of action that would allow him to confront the past while attempting to navigate the perilous social landscape that surrounded him. The first step was to gain clarity, to understand every aspect of the young woman's history. The Baron sought out old family records, letters, and accounts from servants who had been in the household for decades. He read correspondence between relatives, legal documents concerning inheritance, and even obscure journals that chronicled long-buried affairs and decisions made in secret. Piece by piece, a clearer picture began to emerge. The woman's mother had been a distant cousin, a union kept secret to avoid scandal, to preserve appearances and maintain the family's social standing. She had been removed from the family estate at a young age and placed into the hands of distant caretakers, eventually ending up as property elsewhere. The Baron's growing understanding of these events deepened his guilt and determination. He realized that while he had been unaware, the system that placed his sister in such circumstances was deeply flawed, and he had to act. Once he understood the historical context, the Baron began subtle attempts to adjust the young woman's circumstances without alerting the household to the full truth. He altered her duties, reducing her menial labor and allowing her more freedom within the estate. He assigned her tasks that recognized her intelligence and capabilities rather than simply her appearance or social position. These small gestures, though carefully measured, conveyed to her an unexpected respect and attention. She began to notice the difference in the Baron's behavior. The previously authoritative and distant figure now showed concern, care, and even a rare gentleness. It was a delicate balance. He had to protect her from further harm, assert moral responsibility, and yet avoid inciting suspicion or gossip among the other family members and staff. The emotional tension, however, continued to build. The Baron struggled with feelings of guilt, shame, and anger. He was angry at the family members who had orchestrated the concealment of his sister, ashamed of his previous ignorance, and guilty for the time she had already spent in servitude under circumstances orchestrated by his own bloodline. Nights became restless as he wrestled with these emotions, pacing the study and consulting historical accounts, weighing every decision against the potential consequences. Every interaction with his sister was now layered with unspoken meaning, a careful dance of observation, restraint, and tentative trust. Meanwhile, the young woman began to sense the changing dynamics. Though she did not yet know the full extent of her relationship to the Baron, she noticed the increased freedom, the subtle deference, and the rare moments of kindness. It puzzled her, stirring a cautious hope and curiosity. She began to test boundaries gently, exploring the limits of her newfound autonomy, all while remaining observant of the Baron's moods and intentions. In many ways, this period of adjustment became a silent negotiation between two individuals, each aware that the other held pieces of knowledge that could redefine their relationship and the household as a whole. The Baron's partial revelation to her was deliberate and measured. He began to share stories of family history, carefully omitting the most sensitive details, but providing enough information for her to begin piecing together her own origins. He recounted tales of distant relatives, explained the estate's history, and spoke of traditions that seemed mundane yet carried hidden significance. Each story was layered, each word chosen to convey respect, trust, and the beginnings of reconciliation without exposing the full shock of the truth prematurely. This strategy allowed him to guide her understanding, preparing her for the day when the full revelation would be unavoidable. As the household observed these subtle changes, murmurs of curiosity and speculation began to spread. Servants noticed the Baron's increased attention, the redistribution of tasks, and the rare moments of personal interaction with the young woman. Some began to question the reasons for these changes, though none dared speak openly. The family's reputation remained intact for the moment, yet the careful equilibrium that had existed for generations was clearly shifting. The Baron's actions, while discreet, were setting off a chain reaction, rippling through every corner of the estate. By the end of this period, the Baron had established a delicate balance. He had asserted moral responsibility, taken steps to improve his sister's circumstances, and prepared the household for the eventual truth. Yet the emotional fallout was far from over. Guilt lingered, questions persisted, and the moral weight of his family's secrets pressed upon him with relentless force. The young woman, now a quiet observer of these changes, was unknowingly moving closer to a revelation that would redefine her life, her identity, and her relationship with the Baron. The stage was set for the inevitable climax, a confrontation with the truth that would test the strength of family bonds, the courage of individuals, and the limits of societal expectation. The moment of revelation arrived quietly, yet it carried the force of a storm. One afternoon, the Baron summoned the young woman to the main hall, a vast room where sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the ornate tapestries and polished marble floors. The household had gathered for a routine inspection, though no one knew that the atmosphere was about to shift dramatically. The Baron stood at the center of the hall, his posture rigid yet charged with emotion, and for the first time he prepared to confront the truth openly, not just with her, but with everyone who had been a part of the estate. As the young woman approached, she noticed the gravity in the Baron's expression, the rare tension in his normally controlled demeanor. He addressed her directly, speaking in a tone that balanced authority with vulnerability. He recounted pieces of family history, gradually weaving a narrative that left no room for doubt. He spoke of her mother, of the circumstances that had hidden her away from the family, and finally, with deliberate care, he revealed the truth. She was a sister, a direct descendant of the same bloodline that had shaped the estate for generations. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible, echoing off the high ceilings of the hall. Silence followed, a silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity as everyone present absorbed the gravity of what had just been confessed. The young woman's reaction was immediate yet restrained. Shock, confusion, and a dawning understanding flickered across her face. She struggled to reconcile her memories, her upbringing and the life she had lived with the reality of being the Baron's sister. The truth struck with the force of a revelation that no preparation could soften. Every previous interaction, every observation she had made about the Baron and the household, suddenly acquired new meaning. She realized the layers of deception that had governed her life and the deliberate concealment that had led her to the estate as a gift. The emotional weight of the revelation was overwhelming, yet she maintained her composure, understanding instinctively that the moment demanded courage and restraint. The household erupted in quiet murmurs. Servants exchanged glances, some wide-eyed with shock, others whispering speculations about how such a secret could have remained hidden for so long. Those closest to the Baron, who had observed the subtle changes in his behavior, were astonished to see the full truth laid bare. Questions began to circulate, some voiced aloud, others left unspoken, as the implications of the revelation rippled through every corner of the estate. The careful hierarchy, the rigid rules of propriety, and the long-standing traditions of authority were suddenly challenged by a truth that transcended social expectations. The Baron's actions, once discreet and measured, had culminated in a confrontation that exposed both the cruelty of past generations and the moral imperative of the present. Amidst the unfolding chaos, the Baron struggled to maintain control over the situation. He addressed the household, emphasizing the need for respect, discretion, and acknowledgement of the young woman's humanity. His voice, though firm, carried an emotional resonance that conveyed the gravity of the revelation. He reminded everyone that the family's legacy, while flawed, was now confronted with an opportunity for redemption, a chance to correct past wrongs and to recognize the humanity that had long been denied. The young woman, standing beside him, began to understand that her life was no longer defined solely by the circumstances of her enslavement, but by the acknowledgement of her rightful place within the family and the estate. The emotional impact of the revelation extended beyond the Baron and his sister. Extended family members, previously unaware of the circumstances, were forced to confront their own complicity and silence. Some expressed outrage, disbelief, or denial, struggling to reconcile the idyllic image of nobility with the reality of hidden injustices. Others responded with remorse, recognizing the cruelty of decisions made by previous generations and the moral responsibility to make amends. The household staff, too, experienced a mixture of shock, awe, and reflection. The revelation disrupted the social equilibrium, challenging assumptions about loyalty, obedience, and authority, and forcing every individual to consider the ethical dimensions of their own roles within the estate. For the Baron, the revelation was both a culmination and a beginning. The secrecy that had haunted him, the inner conflict that had dominated his thoughts, and the moral questions that had tormented him for weeks all converged in this moment of clarity. He realized that acknowledging the truth was not the end of his struggle, but the first step toward reconciliation, justice, and the restoration of moral integrity within his family. The young woman, now fully aware of her identity and her place within the family, faced a new reality, one where she could assert her rights, claim her heritage, and begin to navigate a life freed from the shadows of concealment. In the days that followed, the estate adjusted to this new reality. Conversations that had once been restricted by secrecy became open and candid, though tempered by the need for respect and propriety. The Baron worked to integrate his sister into the household as an equal, assigning her responsibilities that reflected her intelligence, capability, and status as a family member rather than as property. The young woman, in turn, demonstrated resilience, grace, and wisdom in navigating complexities of her newly recognized role. Together, they began the slow process of healing, rebuilding trust, and redefining the relationships within the estate. The Christmas gift that had initially arrived as an object of status and social display had transformed into a catalyst for profound moral reckoning, emotional growth, and familial restoration. The weeks and months following the revelation were a period of profound transformation for the Baron, his sister, and the entire household. The initial shock and tension gradually gave way to a careful reconstruction of relationships, responsibilities, and moral understanding. The Baron had learned a painful but crucial lesson. Power and privilege could never excuse cruelty, and wealth could never replace the human bonds severed by secrecy and societal expectation. Every day became an opportunity to right past wrongs, not merely for appearances, but for the acknowledgement of justice, dignity, and shared humanity. The young woman's life changed in ways she could scarcely have imagined. No longer viewed as property, she began participating in the governance of the household, offering insights, guidance, and intelligence that were previously suppressed by her role as an enslaved figure. Her voice, once silenced by circumstance, became a source of respect and authority. She reclaimed her identity, piecing together her personal history, understanding her family lineage, and navigating the complex social dynamics of a household that had once treated her as invisible. The Baron, in turn, became not only her brother but a guardian of her dignity, responsible for correcting the injustices that had defined her early life. The extended family, once complicit in concealment and manipulation, now faced their own reckoning. Some expressed remorse and sought to assist in restoring her rightful status, while others struggled with shame and denial. The household, which had once operated under rigid hierarchies and unquestioned authority, slowly adapted to a new moral equilibrium, one where transparency, respect, and ethical responsibility replaced unquestioned obedience and social posturing. The Baron, acutely aware of the fragility of social perception, balanced the need for discretion with the imperative of moral action, ensuring that the young woman's recognition was respected without inviting unnecessary scandal. The emotional landscape of the estate remained complex. The Baron wrestled with guilt over the years lost, the moral compromises of his predecessors, and a lingering shadow of societal norms that had allowed such concealment to flourish. Yet he also experienced a profound sense of relief and purpose. The acknowledgement of his sister, the correction of historical wrongs within the household, and the restoration of dignity to her life provided a rare and meaningful redemption. The young woman, for her part, navigated the delicate balance between anger, forgiveness, and self-assertion, gradually establishing her own role and authority in the household, while maintaining the grace and composure that had defined her from the beginning. Beyond the walls of the estate, the revelation resonated with broader implications. The story of the Baron and his sister became a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy, the moral failures of entrenched systems of power, and the necessity of confronting uncomfortable truths. It illuminated the consequences of viewing human lives as objects of social display, reminding all who heard it that dignity, family, and justice are paramount, transcending titles, wealth, and status. For the Baron, the personal reckoning merged with a larger ethical awakening, a recognition that the choices of one generation echo through the lives of the next, shaping destinies, relationships, and the moral fabric of society itself. The process of reconciliation was gradual but deliberate. The Baron worked to educate his household, encourage fairness, and dismantle lingering structures of privilege that perpetuated inequality. He collaborated with his sister to create an environment where respect, autonomy, and recognition of human worth guided every interaction. The young woman, empowered by her newfound status, took on responsibilities that had once been denied to her, contributing to the estate's management, cultural decisions, and the mentorship of other household members. Together, they began the slow but essential work of rebuilding trust, fostering understanding, and transforming the legacy of their family into one defined by ethical accountability rather than hidden cruelty. As the years passed, the Christmas gift that had arrived so innocently became a defining moment in the history of the estate. What had initially been a symbol of status and objectification transformed into a catalyst for moral awakening, emotional healing, and the restoration of justice. The Baron's sister, once hidden and oppressed, emerged as a central figure in the household, respected, recognized, and honored for her identity and contributions. The Baron himself, having confronted profound truths of his family's past, became a steward of change, ensuring that future generations would inherit not only wealth and power, but also a conscience informed by justice and empathy. Ultimately, the story of the Baron and his sister serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of secrecy, the enduring impact of human cruelty, and the transformative power of truth. It illustrates how a single moment, an unexpected Christmas gift, can unearth hidden histories, challenge societal norms, and redefine the lives of those involved. In facing the truth, acknowledging past wrongs, and working toward reconciliation, both the Baron and his sister exemplified the courage, resilience, and moral fortitude necessary to overcome a legacy of oppression. The estate, once a symbol of wealth and hierarchy, became a testament to the enduring power of acknowledgement, justice, and the bonds of family restored. In the quiet evenings that followed, the Baron often reflected on the journey that had begun with a seemingly ordinary Christmas morning. The snow-covered gardens, the flickering candlelight, and the echoes of history served as reminders of both past mistakes and the potential for redemption. The young woman, now fully recognized as a sister, walked the halls with dignity, her presence a living testament to resilience and the triumph of humanity over secrecy and oppression. Together, they navigated the complexities of legacy, responsibility, and familial bonds, transforming what had once been a horrifying secret into a story of revelation, justice, and enduring connection.